And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather again showing this strong front moving up, crossing Kodiak Island this evening, pushing up toward the North Gulf Coast, Kenai Peninsula area. Warm front spreading rain into the Panhandle. There are high wind warnings out, winter storm warnings out, and winter weather advisories out for locations in the path of this system. We'll see tomorrow. Just a trough now extending up into south central Alaska. To the east of that trough, heavy wind, rain and snow here across the North Gulf Coast. A high wind warning out tomorrow for the North Gulf Coast. Gust 80 miles an hour possible. Copper River Basin, heavy snow there. Heavy wind and rain beginning to push into the Panhandle. Better conditions west of that trough axis, and a lot better conditions up to the north here, although getting a little breezy over portions of the interior, staying windy along the Arctic coast. And for Thursday, that low center, after tracking east-northeastward, kind of slides northwestward along that trough axis right into Cook Inlet by the afternoon and slowly weakening. So that'll bring another round of heavy wind and precipitation into the North Gulf Coast and the Kenai Peninsula during the late night Wednesday and early Thursday, beginning to improve in the afternoon slowly, especially back here to the west. Snow, blowing snow, light snow, Arctic coast, winds pretty strong again there right into the north central interior. And this system bringing a good shot of moisture and some wind into the Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula as it tracks east-southeastward. And for the coastal water forecasts, gales all along the coast for tomorrow. South coast, southeast winds 40 to 45 knots. Central coast, southeast 45 and southeast 45 to 50 knots there with seas building up to 36 feet on the north coast. Gale warnings for Clarence Strait, southeast winds 35 knots, small craft advisories for the Passage Canal, Lynn Canal area for winds to 25 miles an hour with higher gusts. And then for Thursday, lighter winds now, south 25 for the south coast, southeast 25 to 30 knots, central coast, and gale warnings for the north coast there, south to southeast 35 to 45 knots. And for the Clarence Strait area, small craft advisory, southeast winds 25 knots. Gale warnings for Stevens Passage, southeast 35 knots. And Lynn Canal, southeast 20 knots, gusts to 35. Prince William Sound tomorrow, full gales definitely there. East 45 knots, seas 12 feet. Storm warnings, gales and storms for the eastern North Gulf Coast for east winds 45 to 55 knots. And for the western North Gulf Coast, much lighter winds in the forecast there, east at 20 knots. Cook Inlet, small craft advisories, north to northeast, 25 to 30 knots. Kamishak Bay, northeast winds, 30 knots. And the Barren Islands, east winds at 25. For Thursday, much lighter winds here in Cook Inlet, northeast at 10, northwest 15, Kamishak Bay, west 25 knots for the Barren Islands. And south to southeast winds, 30 to 35 knots for the eastern North Gulf Coast. Winds coming down, Prince William Sound, southeast to 25, sea subsiding to about 4 feet, southeast 20 for the western North Gulf Coast. Kodiak Island tomorrow, east to northeast winds, 25 knots. The Alaska Peninsula, northwest winds, 25 to 30 knots. Northwest 30-knot winds for Bristol Bay. And for Thursday, variable winds 10 to 15 knots for the Alaska Peninsula. Small craft advisories, Bristol Bay, northeast winds at 25 knots. Kodiak Island, northwest winds 25 knots. And for the eastern Aleutians on Wednesday, west to northwest winds at 30 knots there. South winds 30 knots for Adak and Atka. And then gales with that next system coming in, west-southwest winds 35 to 40 knots there for the areas west of Adak to Shemya. And those gales continue on Thursday there, west-northwest, 35 to 45 knots. And for the central Aleutians here, west-northwest, 30 to 35 knots. And for the eastern Aleutians, west to northwest winds, 20 to 30 knots. For the southwest coast here, north to northwest winds, 20 to 30 knots. North 15, St. Lawrence Island. Pribilofs, northwest at 25. North winds 15 for St. Matthew Island. Moving ahead to Thursday for these areas, small craft advisories for the southwest coast. West to northwest winds, 25 to 30 knots there. Pribilofs, north at 20. Northwest 30-knot winds St. Matthew Island, and north of 25 for St. Lawrence Island. And for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, central and eastern Beaufort Sea coast, or actually the entire coastline here, east winds for the day Wednesday, 30 to 35 knots, seas around 7 feet. 40-knot winds here, Cape Lisburn to Point Hope at 40 knots, and then the Chukchi Sea northeast winds 20 to 25 knots. And then even stronger winds in store for the Arctic coast on Thursday. Full gales up there, east to northeast winds 40 to 45 knots. Gale warnings all the way down into the northern Chukchi Sea. And then as you head toward the Bering Strait there toward Wales, northeast at 25 knots.